Hello, Marketing 2 students. It was so nice to see you. And I'm so excited for this sports and entertainment marketing class. Today is our first screencast. So, this is the first chapter of notes I'm going to do with you. And we'll kind of do this here and there throughout our semester. But the first one that we're going to kind of talk about today is the history of sports. As we look at the history of sports and entertainment marketing, it's important to understand all the things that have happened over the years because yes, we're in an era where sports are super important and we see them all the time, but that hasn't always been the case. So today what we're going to talk about are the eras of sports entertainment, and then how does marketing play such an influential role within those. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what is the difference between marketing and sports marketing. So from marketing one, you probably remember that marketing is a set of institutions, processes for creating, communicating, delivering, creating value, and exchanging offerings that have customers, clients, partners, and society at large. So basically, how do we make and sell a product and promote it? Where sports marketing is a lot of the same types of things, only now we're talking about sports experiences. And you're going to hear the word experience a ton in this class because that is a huge factor about sports marketing and entertainment marketing is you're selling an experience. You're not selling the sport necessarily, you're selling the experience of getting someone to come. And I think that's the big thing to really keep in mind as we start looking at that sports marketing is what's the value that they're going to watch or turn on a TV and watch a sporting event or even come in person to that sporting event. So those are some things to think about. So as we look at the eras of sports entertainment, there are really four different eras that we're going to focus on today. We're going to talk about the monopoly era, we're going to talk about the television era, the highlight era, and the experience era, which is where we are right now. The Monopoly era is from 1900 to 1950, and this really marked the beginning of what is known as the sports industry in the United States. So, population pretty much shifted from mainly rural existence to the growth of our urban populations that we see today. Sports consumption occurred typically in our newspaper, radio, because a live event wasn't really accessible. It wasn't as easy to do. And then all of our major professional sports were limited to really large cities, where smaller cities would hold more minor league sports franchises. So a little bit different of a feel than what you probably see now. Remember, this is before TV, so keep that in mind. As we look at that Monopoly era, we're also looking at the global sporting events. They were really only championship boxing matches in the Olympics. This era began some super brands. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So these super brands were like the New York Yankees. Notre Dame football came to fame because of their success. And they're still looked at as these super brands even today. And those are the things to really think about. These symbols or these logos are still widely known. So they have a very high brand awareness that goes along with it. As we look at professional sports, players started to become famous. So not only were our sports becoming more popular, everything else was starting to become more popular. And then we started to see something called endorsements. And we'll get into more endorsement products as we kind of go through. But this is basically where sports stars or sports players were able to endorse their products. They were able to earn more money than just what their contract was to play the sport. So those are some things to kind of think about. Guest experiences became a priority as legendary stadiums were built. So like I said, that experience is going to be a huge factor as we look at it. And then venues were being built to accommodating hosting both professional and collegiate events. So we were seeing more and more people and more stadiums that were becoming bigger and more versatile. And then we also started seeing entertainment venues such as concerts being in the same place as our professional and collegiate sporting events. So we saw this growth all the way across the board. So you can kind of see some of the different fields at the time, what was kind of happening. I have a picture of Wrigley Field, etc. So you can see like just how packed these stadiums were and like how people kind of flocked to them. So those are some things to kind of think about. From there, we're going to switch into the next era, which is all about the television era. So as we look at the television era, this is from the 50s to 1990. And this era had the most growth because thinking of it from this standpoint, this is really where our sports industry developed the most that we've seen. So televisions became popular and common in most households, and then all of your major sporting events were accessible from home. So the population moved from urban to suburban, which kind of hurt that live sports industry. People had to drive in to go to a sporting event. But that television side of it kept people connected with their favorite teams. So for me, if I ever moved away from, let's say, Wisconsin, and I'm a big Packers fan, I would still be able to see a Packers game. And that was something to really consider. A lot of my friends, it's really interesting, they're actually not Packer fans at all. So we have friends that are really big Browns fans. We have friends that are Dolphins fans, and then we have friends that are 49er fans. So not a lot of Packer fans, but they're still able to watch all of their different teams. Here's my trivia question. I will ask you, what is my favorite sports team? And it is not the Packers. I love the Denver Broncos. So just keep that in mind. I have a Peyton Manning jersey hanging up in my closet. So I want you to know I love the Denver Broncos. So I'm going to ask that. You guys better get this right. Other channels that were transporting made easier. So like flights and highways. Justin and I actually flew out to the Broncos Packers game for Peyton's last year. And we flew out to Denver. We got to watch the game, etc. Probably about 4 or 5 years ago. So keep that in mind. That's my trivia question for this one. Television era, promotion became a huge play. So like we have to talk about that marketing standpoint in here. MLB held a game of the week. ABC has Monday Night Football. Super Bowl becoming an iconic event where people legitimately didn't even care to watch the game. They cared to watch the commercials. That's a marketing ploy. That is a marketing thing that they did. ABC's Wide World of Sports, a TV show, it ran from 1961 to 1998. And basically they like highlighted all these different things like the Harlem Globetrotters or Evel Knievel. Those are some things to kind of think about. ESPN launched in 1979 and CNN was in 1980. So they were the first ones to host their first 24-hour news cycle. From there, sponsorship marketing strategy really rose. So we saw a huge rise in that sponsorships. And our television era continued. We also saw the Olympics. So in 1984, the Olympics were held in LA, and it was a net loss for Los Angeles, but the economic impact helped keep it alive. So like we always think about the Olympics being this huge thing, but a lot of times it was actually a loss and they didn't have as much revenue as what you may think. And then sponsorships happened. And then we started to see the Olympics have more than 200 million within that. So those are just some things to kind of think about. That was the power of that television era that we see. The next era that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the highlight era. This is when the internet became available. So like literally I could look up what the score of the game was. I could look up what anything was happening, or like if I missed the game, I could watch it later. So like literally I could catch up with any of my favorite teams, press conference updates, etc. Shows like Sports Center became more popular. Pardon the Interruption show highlights, games kind of discussing relevant sports topics. Those all became part of this highlight era, which was from 1990 to 2010. Also within the highlight era, we got what we wanted when we wanted it. So like because of the internet, we were able to watch everything that we needed to because it was just easy to get there. And it also became something that we kind of know is there was really no off season. And I always think of my husband on this side. My husband loves football, but he listens to literally Packer Talk Radio every single day, no matter if it's in season or not. not. So like even in May, even in June, he's still listening to what's going on in the Packers. So most professional sports teams have their own TV shows or TV channels. So like we have an NFL network, an MLB network, etc. And then what that does is it adds additional revenue streams for advertising and broadcasting because more people are going to have commercials, sponsorships, etc. for those shows. So it makes it so that sport is that much more advertised and promoted, but also making more money. Within the highlight era, again, we also have to talk about fantasy. Fantasy sports became very, very large in our highlight era. So at one point, there was 57 million people that participated in fantasy sports. That is huge. So like pooling leagues kind of happened. You started to like build your teams and like bet against people, etc. But that was something to get people more engaged. So like I personally used to have a fantasy team, and it was really interesting because the years that I've had fantasy teams, I've been so much more into football than the years that I don't. So if I don't have a fantasy team, I don't really stay up with anybody else's team. Like I don't know the players as well. But when I have a fantasy team, I'm more engaged. And that highlight is going to be part of that kind of goes along with it. I'm just more, I think engaged is the best word to use. Yeah. And then in the experience era, which is kind of where we're at today, we start to talk about how do we create an experience? How do I get people to come to my games? How do I get people to watch our game live? Because that's a big factor. Recording it is fine, but like the most money that you're going to make is if people are going to come to your event and if people are going to watch it live. So what do you do to help build that experience? So sometimes you have your VIP tickets, you have your like backstage passes, like those types of things. But what are you doing to create that customer experience or that experience for your person? So like think about it from this standpoint. So if you've ever been to Camp Randall at a football game and they do their like third quarter stretch, so everybody stands up and they all jump to jump around or dance to jump around. That is an experience. I will never forget the first time I experienced that. And I was in the upper deck and literally I thought it might break because it was shaking so bad. Those are things to think about. That's an experience. Like I distinctly remember what that was like. So those are some things to kind of think about. Social media is a huge part of that experience. So social media helps allow fans to interact with people, interact with their favorite teams, superstars, etc. Baker Mayfield, one of my favorite stories is Baker Mayfield had something, I don't remember what it was, but like a couple had a baby and they named the baby Baker and they like snapped a picture of it or of the baby and they like snapped or like Instagram like basically tagged him in it. And Baker like wrote a thank you card or like a congratulations card to this family and then signed a little infant jersey for this little kid. Like that's part of that social media. That's an experience. That's something that people are going to literally remember forever. Especially for that family. So those are some things to kind of think about. Not saying you need to name your child Baker, but those are things to think about. And then looking at those venues, teams, players, artists, what are they doing to become more involved? Because you got to be more involved. You have to kind of see everything that's happening with it. So a couple examples you guys can kind of see. These are all things that have happened in the last probably 3 to 4 years, but like being more involved within those types of things. So that is really the end of my notes for the moment. So like the next part that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about advancements, but we're not quite there yet. So yeah, I hope you listen to this and then we'll kind of talk